Hello, welcome. Welcome to this, our third interview in our interview series, moving away from Taylorism. A look at management and leadership through the Deming lens. Again, these interviews are being hosted by the Chartered Quality Institute's Deming Special Interest Group. And following our last interview, Quality Beyond Looking Good, today we are going to explore the whole question of in search of excellence. Again, Dr. Bill Bellows, welcome.
Welcome, Chris.
Well, continuing from our last discussion, beyond looking good, we did lead off on a whole quest in terms of making improvement in organization and going in this search of excellence. So again, just to start off, just share with us some of your thoughts in relation to organizations embarking upon this journey of excellence.
Well, first, what came to mind as we were getting ready is the title "In Search of Excellence" comes from the title of a book written by Tom Peters and Robert Waterman. I believe it was the two of them authored that book in the early '80s, and so Dr. Deming became very popular in 1980, and a few years later, Tom Peters and again this Waterman wrote a book, In Search of Excellence. And they went out and found companies that were excellent, and many of those companies were U.S. companies, and so I think part of what they were trying to do is say, in order to be excellent, you don't have to be a Japanese company to be excellent, um, and so Peters became very popular, wrote a number of books, and I remember watching him on these television there'd be documentaries on his latest book. So he'd come out with a book, and in order to write the book, it'd be his latest stories about some companies that were excellent, and then he'd have the book ready to go, to be released. He would film a television show that showed up on public, tended to show up on public television, so not the major networks, but on public television. And so he'd be on stage in front of 1,000 people promoting his latest book, his latest message. He would introduce people he had interviewed that were excellent companies. And by the end of the evening, the model was, I have just discovered how to be excellent. These people that I'm inviting you to meet work in excellent places. So just copy what they do, and that's what you do. And whatever they did was the thing to do. Tell how this would work under a different setting, and then I want to relate that to when I met Dr. Deming in 1993, and then I want to go beyond that into what I mean by In Search of Excellence. And so if Tom Peters was writing a book on how to live to be 100, I mean, how to be successful, in terms of excellence, in terms of living, then he'd first have to go find people that are 100 years old. So just like he goes out there and he finds excellent companies and says, this is what excellent companies do. So Christopher, you and everybody else should go do what excellent companies do. I thought, well, if he was going to write a book on how to live to be 100, you'd have to go find people that live to be 100.
Yeah.
And let's say let's say in that grouping of people who live to be 100, let's say there are two sisters. And they come out on stage and they're, walking out there and they're doing really well. And these sisters come out and they're interviewed, and he says to them, what is your secret to living to be 100? And the two of them say, for example, never get married, live a very healthy life, don't smoke, don't eat red meat, have a vegan diet. And that's how you live to be 100. That's how we live to be 100. And we plan to live another 10 years, at least. Then they bring out a chain smoker, because there's chain smokers out there that don't die of cancer young, and so they're going to find in this group, some 100-year-old chain smoker who comes out and he says, "So what's your secret to living to be 100?" The guy says, first of all, smoke Marlboro. And another thing I do is I take a shot of Old Granddad every evening. So at the end of the day, you say, so you live to be 100, according to this gentleman, by smoking. Smoking's okay. But it seems like what this guy is saying is having a shot of whiskey every evening is the secret to life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he brings out, husband and wife who live to be 100, and they've got another recipe. And where I'm coming from is all these different companies that he brings out have different ways to live to be 100. And I'm serious. You don't have to go far to find people that live to be 100 through different theories. And
Yeah.
those theories involve either staying away from drugs, or drugs are okay, staying away from smoking, or a lifestyle thing, or whatever. And then there's a genetic impact. But you could easily see that he could bring out on stage 5 different people with 5 different ways that they achieved living to 100. And then at the end of the evening, you're thinking to yourself, well, do I do the old granddad thing and smoke, or I'm already married, so I can't do the be single all my life deal. So you're left to your own on how to be successful. Okay. So now let's go back to the second time I met Dr. Deming. And so in the photo behind me is the first time I met Dr. Deming, and I didn't have much to ask him. I don't know anything about his work other than he was famous. I met him in 1993 at his very last 4-day seminar. When he would get tired, he was wheeled in a wheelchair on oxygen because he had cancer that spread to his lungs. So he's on oxygen the entire time. So he was wheeled up on stage. He would read from his book. As he got tired,
Mm-hmm.
the nurse would come over and take him to his room or someplace. And then there were 3 people that would get up on stage one at a time and say, okay, so let's take up. So Dr. Deming said this, so that one of those 3 people took turns continuing until Dr. Deming came back. And then when he came back, those 3 people would sit down. So during one of the breaks, I went up and met these people. And one of them I had heard about before. And so I went up to him because I knew his name and said, I heard about you and your stories Dr. Deming told about you. And so I went up and introduced myself, and he told me the following story, which was really funny. He says he once asked Dr. Deming, what's the difference between Jerry Falwell and Tom Peters? And Deming knew who Tom Peters was. He didn't know who Jerry Falwell was. So he says, this is my Dr. Deming imitation. Who is Jerry Falwell? And the guy says to him, well, Jerry Falwell is a Southern Baptist minister. So Dr. Deming says, all right, so what's the difference between Jerry Falwell and Tom Peters? And the guy says, Jerry Falwell has a message. And so now when I talk about In Search of Excellence, what I love about that title is I think there's 2 types of excellence. There's compliance excellence. So the compliance excellence could be, do these parts meet requirements? Are the beads all white? That's compliance excellence. And I also want to say, when I talk about compliance excellence, the implication is that compliance excellence is not bad. It is. But compliance excellence is saying that you're qualified to vote. So I'm not saying that compliance excellence is bad, but I just want to differentiate that compliance excellence says that these companies are ISO 9000 certified. These parking spots conform to some requirements. These oranges conform to some requirements. Now, another thing which is compliance, so what I see is compliance excellence is saying that these things have complied, therefore these things are good. Elizabeth, they are white beads, not red beads. They are not defects. They comply. And in that world of compliance excellence, what we're also saying is that the things that are good are interchangeable.
Hmm.
Now, the fact that we understand those doctors are good because they comply is compliance excellence. That we can look at those two doctors and say, I would prefer this one over this one for how I think I relate to them, which is an integration issue, or how they relate to other doctors is an integration issue. So to prefer one white bead over another is not compliance excellence, because compliance excellence says they are the same. It doesn't matter which one I take. Contextual excellence is another form of excellence. Contextual excellence is when I say, I want this orange or this parking spot or this doctor, or I want to date this person as opposed to that person. So compliance excellence tells me all those beats are the same, all those things are the same because they comply to some set of standards. Contextual excellence is when I look at the things that meet requirements and have the ability to prefer one over another. And I'm still not saying that one is better than the other. What I'm talking about is that those are two forms of excellence. What I also want to point out is I think organizations operating what Dr. Deming would call the prevailing style of management, what I would refer to as organizations as usual, default heavily to compliance excellence and don't think very much about contextual excellence. Whereas organizations that practice the Deming philosophy, that I would look at as organizations as unusual, have the ability to practice and implement compliance excellence where compliance excellence makes sense, and contextual excellence where contextual excellence makes sense, because they understand through. So what I'm talking about is in search of excellence is not the default everything is compliance excellence, which is the prevailing system of management. What I'm talking about are organizations who thrive as being unusual because they understand the value proposition of compliance excellence and the value proposition of contextual excellence. If all you want to do is stop at good, then you will focus on compliance excellence. If you want to go beyond good, you have to get into the realm of contextual excellence and see things as a system, how they integrate. And it wasn't
Awesome.
until I wrote an article about this and I began to think more about it that I started to realize the breadth and depth of both. And so the other thing I want to point out, just to reinforce again, I'm not saying compliance excellence is bad. What I'm saying is what's bad is that we don't understand the difference between compliance excellence and contextual excellence and have the ability to use whichever is appropriate and choose which excellence. That's the search piece. So in order to search, you have to understand that difference. So if I was to ask you, Chris, so you're now in Jamaica, and during the pandemic. And let me just ask you: is I assume you flew there from Trinidad and Tobago? Is that a
Yes.
safe assumption? You didn't swim there. You didn't take a boat there, right?
No, I took a plane.
All right. So the question is, how far is it from where you are to the airport?
We could be talking about 15 kilometers.
All right.
It's not very
Yeah.
far. Mm.
Yeah. And so if you asked me, how far am I from Los Angeles International Airport, I would say 40 miles.
Mhm.
Right. So in your case, you're talking kilometers, I'm talking miles, you have a number. But in both cases, as soon as we say 40 miles or 15 kilometers, what we're implying is that every mile is the same, every kilometer is the same. And again, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but the assumption in that model is that a mile is a mile is a mile, just like a doctor is a doctor is a doctor, a white bead is a white bead is a white bead. So the story I want to share that helped me get my mind around this and compliance excellence, the difference between compliance excellence and contextual excellence. And this is in an article I wrote about this. Is we have my wife and I have very, very dear friends who are um, military veterans. When they both served in the military for many years, and one, I think, one for 30 some years, the other for 20 some years. And the husband retired first, and then later the wife. And the husband's father once said to him, he was a minister, the father was a minister, and he says to his son, he says, your life's been good to you. But he said, he went to the West Point Military Academy, had a great military career. And he says, his father says to him after he retired, he says, life's been good to you. He says, but what are you doing to serve society? And it really bothered him because he thought, yeah, that's right, I have an obligation to serve society. He spent his entire military career serving society. What his father is saying is, don't stop now. So he started to think about, very compelled by his father's comment, what he could do to serve society. Meanwhile, his wife was working, was in the military. She got deployed to, I believe, Afghanistan for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually she retired from the military. And then he shared with her this plan. And the plan was his way of serving society was going to be to go across the United States and raise awareness of the issues being faced by military veterans, which to this day is, significant numbers of military veterans commit suicide every single day. And
So true.
dozens. It's a big number. It's a big number. And so what Doug had in mind was he could go throughout the United States raising awareness for veterans issues, and that would be his way of paying back and serving society. So he had that plan in mind. He's going to do it by himself. Then when his wife retired, he went to her and said, how'd you like to work with me on the plan? What's the plan? Well, the plan is going to go through all the states and raise awareness. Well, specifically, what he wanted to do was ride his bike the entire way. So his plan was to ride his bike for an entire year through every state in the country, which he did. And the plan was that he would tow behind him, a tent and belongings, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then when his wife retired, the plan was that they would buy a motorhome and she would drive the motorhome either ahead of him or behind him. So it could be that she would go into a given town and meet with people from the local television station, the local newspaper, the local radio station, and make these connections. And then when he would show up, he'd be interviewed, the two of them be interviewed, and they'd raise awareness for veterans issues. And then they're on to the next town. So sometimes he was ahead of her, sometimes she was ahead of him. And they crisscrossed the United States 3 times. They started in upstate New York in the fall, went up into Maine, and then literally they were going about. He was riding his bike on average 60 miles a day,
Hmm.
all told 18,067 miles. They went to Alaska, and then when they got all done across the continental United States, they flew to Hawaii, where they also rode and drove. So here's the punchline. One day, Doug is bicycling through the Rocky Mountains, going up this hill, up this hill, up this hill. And that evening, he's having dinner with his wife, Deb, and he said to her, how'd you like that hill? To which she said, what hill? Because when you're driving a motorhome, every mile is the same, relatively speaking. But when you're pedaling your bicycle, every mile is different. So Doug understood each mile from a contextual excellence perspective. Deb's understanding of every mile in a motorhome was more a compliance excellence model. So if you're
Contextually.
driving, a mile is a mile, that's okay. But imagine the ability when somebody says, Christopher, how many miles to the nearest airport? And your first thought is, Are you driving there? Or are you walking? Or are you riding your bike?
In the Caribbean,
Yeah.
people will typically tell you 15 minutes,
Yep.
10 minutes. It's 10 minutes to the airport,
So,
20 minutes to the
so
airport.
contextual excellence is thinking about use of those miles and the miles being different. Compliance excellence is saying a mile's a mile. So again, I'm not saying one is better than another, but I'm saying is compliance excellence tends to be the default in business as usual, and business as unusual or organizations as unusual would think in terms of, wait a minute, are you riding a bike to go that distance? Are you driving?
Hmm.
Because every mile may be the same, every mile might be different. In fact, there might be a different route, which makes it easier to walk or easier to drive.
So tell me, how does an organization now adopting this fresh lens and recognizing the two contexts of excellence, how do they embark on this journey of excellence?
First of all, I got the journey word again, which is never ending, right? It's I think the important thing is I'd like our audience to understand that in our personal lives we practice contextual excellence and compliance excellence.
Hmm.
We have it, which it's not in the front of our head, and it's not something that we're very conscious of. So I think we have an intuitive understanding at home. Because all white beets are not the same, all oranges are not the same, all red wines are not the same. So in a home setting, we're not conscious of compliance excellence or conscious of contextual excellence. But what I like doing is pointing out to people that, I'll give them an exercise, I'll give them a question, and then I'll point out to them how their answer comes from a compliance excellence perspective, such as you saying it's so many kilometers. That's a compliance excellence answer. And then I point out to them that, and if I ask another question, I can. So what's neat is I've developed questions that someone will either answer from the mindset of compliance excellence or from the mindset of contextual excellence. So a given question will prompt either mindset. So we have both mindsets. The challenge then is, can we use that mindset deliberately? So again, if I ask you a given question, you'll answer from one mindset or the other. I think what is more compelling is, can we become aware of those two mindsets and bring it to bear? Imagine bringing you and I together in a meeting saying, okay, let's deliberately look at this from a contextual excellence perspective. Because if we didn't focus, we may default into contextual excellence. But now that we're aware of both mindsets, imagine our ability through exercise and refinement and improving consciousness of these mindsets. We have the ability to formally look at it from one mindset or the other, because a given mindset in a given situation will give you a different solution.
So where does Malcolm Baldrige fit in? The European Foundation quality model, where do these models fit in this search of excellence?
That's a great question. I've once upon a time I've studied, evaluated, read about Baldrige and ISO 9000 and other things. And what I see most of certifications about is a certification of which is all about compliance excellence. And it's not that they won't learn something along the way. In order to be ISO 9000, you have to go through and do all these things. And that, to introduce another word, two other words, I would say to me that represents a how organizations reform, how they paint the walls differently, how they put labels on things to organize them, such as you might find in it, the application of 5S or 6S. They're going to sweep, simplify. Nothing wrong with those activities, but the term we started using at Rocketdyne for that activity, changing the physical, whether it's a new org chart, a new title, changing the physical, we started referring to as reforming, changing the physical, rearranging the deck chairs. What Dr. Deming's talking about by comparison, and he uses the phrase transformation, and specifically talks about the transformation of the individual. My interpretation upon working with people who work closely with Deming is that what he's talking about with transformation is seeing the world very deliberately through the lens of profound knowledge, where you're become very conscious of the difference between compliance excellence and contextual excellence. Managing, you have the capacity to manage white bead variation, not just focus on all the beads are white and stopping. So what I see in Deming's work is a heavy focus on transformation. And then the idea is that the transformation guides the reforming.
Yes.
So then you have the ability to, with a Deming lens, is let that lens guide the reforming. Again, there's nothing wrong with organizing your silverware drawer, putting the plates where they need to be. I mean, organizing the books in your library in alphabetical order, subject matter order, or by author. There's nothing wrong with reforming to gain advantages. But what I would propose is that what Dr. Deming is talking about is that the reforming is guided by a transformation. So if you don't get into the transformation side of what Dr. Deming is, if you don't focus on transformation as he aspired through an application and understanding and appreciation of a system of profound knowledge, then what you're doing is reforming, remodeling, rearranging. And it's not that organizations aren't achieving great advantages by organizing the tools or organizing the books or organizing the offices, but none of that, if you're not talking about the system of profound knowledge, then you will stop at good. And
Hmm.
you'll think the objective of the Deming philosophy is to eliminate all the red beads. You'll focus on reducing variability continuously. You'll focus on the belief that that there is such a thing called perfection. You'll have a belief that you can eliminate non-value added work, and that becomes focus of a later session. So I think what organizations are doing through pursuit of a lean implementation or Six Sigma implementation is that they will stop at good. They will stop at, once all the variability is eliminated, without asking how much money are we spending to eliminate variation if we could, and what is the corresponding benefit other than to achieve all white beads. What Dr. Deming's talking about is imagine the ability to manage the white bead variability in the doctors, in the oranges, such that if we manage the variability in our respective elements of the process to improve integration and constantly asking, is the effort paying for itself? That's an entirely different mindset, which comes from contextual excellence, not compliance excellence. So Deming's work is heavily based upon this, what I would explain as contextual excellence, with appreciation for where to apply compliance excellence. So I hope that helps.
And not just ticking the boxes, but understanding where you are and, you know, improving based on that understanding of your organization and your organization's context. But, a lot of these words are incorporated in a lot of the improvement methodologies, including, all these excellence frameworks that I mentioned before. So as an organization, dealing with, of course, the tick boxes, trying to build its commitments in relation to really excelling and sustaining their results and momentum, what suggestions do you have for them in getting organized, in embarking upon this sort of metamorphosis, this sort of transformation that goes deeper and more sustainable than complying. But how do we dig deeper into continually working together, learning together, transforming together? What suggestions would you put forward to
Well,
an organization trying to embark on that journey?
well, and I'll throw out a few things, and then we can get into more detail in another session.
Mm-hmm.
I think of paramount importance is looking at Deming's work with a different context.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's easy for people to look at Deming's work as a means to achieve compliance excellence. And I think if people aren't aware, then they will likely take his work and believe that continual improvement means faster, cheaper, all white beads, which means good. So one is I would encourage our listeners, our viewers, to realize that Dr. Deming's message was far bigger than that. He was expounding upon looking at things in the system. Integral to his work is acknowledgement of variation in the white beads. And in chapter 10 of the New Economics, he provides a great explanation of Dr. Taguchi's work, which is where he and I both learned of the impact of white bead variation. So I think it's paramount that people, the individuals watching, before they start looking at how do I transform the organization, is they continue a personal transformation in the and included in that is going back to Dr. Deming's work and looking at it through the lens we're hoping to create through these sessions, which is there's a lot more there than meets the eye. That if you look at his work and stop at and believe that what he was saying was eliminate all the red beads and then we're done, then you didn't understand the variation in the white bead piece, and you didn't understand how the white beads fit into a bigger system. But also what I would say is that he was striving to make that message clearer. He was striving to be able to say to us, Bill and Chris, there is variation. And so in the New Economics, he's telling us there's variation in the white beads. Look at things in the system. So that was his message. But what I find is, even though that was his message, it wasn't what people heard. Their filters were on, and they interpreted what he was saying as faster, cheaper, good. So I think the paramount message I'd like people to come away with is that he was articulating something which I think is far more than most people heard, and he knew that. He knew. I know from several people that work closely with him. Um, one Gypsy Ranny and the other Bill Cooper, and both of them, met him in the early '80s and spent a lot of time with him. And Gypsy said she once asked him something about, what do people get out of your seminars? And his comment to her was, he said, he said, I know what I said, I don't know what they heard. And with Bill Cooper, who's still with us, Bill's in San Diego. Gypsy sadly died a few years ago. Uh, Bill asked Deming once, what percent of the people who come out of your 4-day seminars really understand what it is you're trying to say? And he knew, and he told Bill, very small, very few. So, and I find this myself. I think it's very easy to see his work and narrowly define it as improving quality. And what does that mean? It means the elimination of defects through reducing variability through inspection. And I would like people to realize that what he has in mind is how to manage not just quality per se, but manage resources, our time, our energy, our enthusiasm, our ideas, um, money, equipment. How do we manage all these within an organization for the organization to thrive by continually improving. And then what we'll look at in another session is what I would also offer, and it's far more than continual improvement, far more. But I just want to put that in
And
there.
with my last question for the day, right? And sticking with that continual improvement point and more than continual improvement, a lot of us in the quality profession seem to think that quality is about just solving problems
Yeah.
and eliminating, problems from the workplace. What are some of your thoughts, in closing, uh, as we also strive for excellence? Do you think that just simply putting out the fires and solving all the problems will get us better and better quality and get us to the point of excellence? Mhm.
Well, in our module on Beyond Looking Good, because what I hear you saying is why is it that we cannot think beyond good? And my response to that is that in our personal lives, we do not stop at good. And what does that mean? It means when we're going to the supermarket looking for the ripest orange or the ripest tomato, all those tomatoes meet requirements. All those doctors meet requirements. So what I would say is when we appreciate the difference between contextual excellence, which is all tomatoes being sold there that aren't bruised are the same, all oranges are the same, all doctors are the same, and point out that as soon as we start to, as soon as we realize that we want this orange over this orange, or this doctor over this doctor, or this parking spot over this parking spot, we're beginning to, as we become more aware, you become aware that the variation in things that are good, understanding that variation benefits us because how we plan to use that doctor, use that orange, use that parking spot, using one versus another. So I think as we begin to realize that we intuitively do these things, and why do we do them? Because we're looking for the best recipe, we're looking for the best lunch, we're looking for the best orange juice, we're looking for the best surgical outcome. So what I find very compelling is to, instead of trying to explain to people why you should use the Deming philosophy, and treat it as your glass is empty and I'm going to fill your glass up and explain to you the Deming philosophy, or that you should adopt it, you should use it. I think far more powerful is to have people appreciate the aspects of the Deming philosophy that they use naturally. Not that Dr. Deming even said go through the oranges, but what Dr. Deming is doing in the system of profound knowledge is codifying many of the things we already do, and he's giving us an explanation for why we do it. And I think as we improve that consciousness and allow us to talk about these things, then we're more able to use compliance excellence where it makes sense, use contextual excellence where it makes sense. And these terms, compliance excellence and in search of good, and beyond looking good, these were my ways of trying to explain to coworkers and friends and colleagues, clients, students, what Dr. Deming is saying. So in his work, you will not see compliance excellence, contextual excellence. You won't see that in his work. But my proposal is that for our viewers, our listeners, that as you think about things through these mental models and they become shared with others, I think it makes Dr. Deming's work, allows you to appreciate how really profound knowledge is.
And again, Dr. Bill Bellows, I want to thank you for these gems of wisdom. I do think that it will add a lot of value in assisting us to refresh and refine our own thinking as we try to apply and learn more about the Deming lens. So again, thank you, Dr. Bellows, for your time.